On an ordinary night, in an ordinary school, a single dad was handed the letter he once wrote on the darkest night of his life. But instead of surrendering to his pain, he spoke words. No one expected words that lit a fire of hope. That spark became a movement, but not everyone wanted it to survive. He was almost broken again, until a missing girl forced the town to face the truth. Can one man's choice to live save an entire community from despair? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Cedar Ridge High as Mike Alvarez worked his key into the main entrance lock. The metal was cool against his fingers, and the familiar click echoed in the empty courtyard. He pushed the heavy door open, breathing in the quiet that always filled the building before students and teachers arrived. Mike wheeled his trusted cleaning cart down the freshly waxed hallway, its squeaky wheel creating a rhythm that matched his humming. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. His weathered hands gripped the cart's handle, steering it past rows of blue lockers that would soon be surrounded by teenagers. "Let's see," he muttered to himself, pulling out his daily checklist. "Start with the math wing today." His thoughts drifted to Leah as he mentioned math. His daughter had been studying late into the night for her algebra test, her desk lamp creating a warm glow in their small apartment. He'd brought her hot chocolate and watched her scrunch her nose in concentration, just like her mother used to do. Mike pulled his mop from the bucket, the familiar motion as natural as breathing after 15 years on the job. The wet mop head made satisfying swishing sounds against the linoleum as he worked his way down the hall. He took pride in these quiet moments, making sure every inch of floor gleamed. "Morning, Mike," Mrs. Carter's cheerful voice carried from the choir room. The music teacher always arrived early to prepare for first period. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he called back, smiling. "How's the spring concert coming along?" She appeared in the doorway, sheet music clutched to her chest. "Oh, these kids are going to blow everyone away. How's our Leah doing? Ready for her big test?" Mike's chest swelled with pride. "She's been working so hard. You know how she gets, all focused and determined." "Just like her father," Mrs. Carter said with a knowing look. "That girl's got your work ethic, that's for sure." He ducked his head, touched by the compliment but uncomfortable with praise. "Just trying to do right by her," he said softly, returning to his mopping. The morning progressed steadily as Mike worked his way through his routine. He cleared paper towel dispensers in the bathrooms, wiped down mirrors, and made sure every classroom had fresh chalk or dry erase markers. In the science wing, he carefully cleaned up a spilled chemical experiment from the previous day, following proper safety protocols. Around 10 o'clock, he was emptying trash bins in the cafeteria when he heard the click of heels against tile. Principal Whitaker appeared, her tailored suit as crisp as always, tablet computer tucked under her arm. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, her voice carrying that precise tone she always used. "Do you have a moment?" Mike straightened up, wiping his hands on his uniform. "Of course, Principal Whitaker." She glanced down at her tablet, tapping it a few times. "I noticed you're not on the list for tonight's Hope Assembly. We need all staff members present, given recent events." Mike's brow furrowed. He usually used evening hours to catch up on deep cleaning or maintenance projects, while Leah studied at the library. "I hadn't planned on attending. There's some work in the gym storage room that needs—" "The storage room can wait," Whitaker cut in, her expression unreadable. "Your presence is required tonight, 7 o'clock sharp." Something in her tone made Mike uneasy. While they'd always maintained a professional relationship, today there was an edge to her voice he couldn't quite place. "Is everything all right, Principal Whitaker?" She adjusted her glasses, not quite meeting his eyes. "Everything's fine. Just be there, Mr. Alvarez. 7 o'clock. Mike watched her walk away, that squeaky wheel on his cart suddenly seeming louder in the empty cafeteria. He pulled out his phone to text Leah about the change in plans, hoping she wouldn't mind studying alone at home instead. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks. Mike fixed a stuck locker on the second floor, replaced burned-out fluorescent tubes in the library, and helped the cafeteria staff clean up after lunch. All the while, Whitaker's odd behavior nagged at him. As the final bell rang and students poured into the halls, Mike found himself pausing near the math wing. Through the open door, he spotted Leah emerging from her classroom, a relieved smile on her face. "How'd it go, Mija?" he called out. She bounced over to him, her backpack swinging. "I think I aced it, Dad. All that studying paid off." "That's my girl," he said, resisting the urge to hug her in front of her classmates. "Listen, about tonight. I know. I got your text. It's fine, Maya's coming over to study anyway." Leah adjusted her backpack strap. "What's this assembly even about?" Mike shook his head. "Not sure. Principal Whitaker was pretty vague about it." "That's weird," Leah said, her expression turning thoughtful. "Usually she has like 3 different PowerPoint presentations, ready for everything." "Yeah?" Mike agreed, that uneasy feeling returning. "Weird." The afternoon light was growing golden as Mike finished his regular duties. He was storing supplies in his closet when Principal Whitaker appeared again, this time standing in the doorway. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, her voice softer than before. "I just wanted to confirm you'll be at the assembly tonight." Mike turned to face her, noting how she gripped her tablet like a shield. "Yes, I'll be there, though I still don't understand why." "Good," she interrupted, already turning to leave. 7 o'clock, don't be late." Mike frowned at her retreating form, then looked around his small closet, his sanctuary in many ways. The organized shelves of cleaning supplies, the photos of Leah taped to the wall, the small radio that kept him company during late shifts. Something about tonight felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on what. He sighed, closing the closet door and checking his watch. Just enough time to grab dinner before this mysterious assembly. Whatever Whitaker had planned, he'd face it with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else. The school gymnasium hummed with the controlled chaos of 800 teenagers finding their seats. Sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as students shuffled past each other in the bleachers, their voices echoing off the high ceiling. Near the stage, Mrs. Prappus, Carter's community choir, adjusted their matching blue robes, warming up with soft harmonies that floated above the general din. Mike worked methodically in his corner, lifting metal folding chairs and stacking them against the wall. His movements were practiced and efficient. Years of setting up assemblies had taught him exactly how to angle each chair so the stack wouldn't topple. The physical work helped steady his nerves. Something about Principal Whitaker's request to attend this assembly had felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on why. A group of giggling freshmen rushed past, nearly knocking over his careful arrangement. Mike steadied the chairs without comment, used to being as invisible as the walls he maintained. His eyes caught sight of his daughter Leah, sitting with her friends halfway up the bleachers. She gave him a small wave, and he returned it with a gentle smile. "Check 1, 2, crackled through the speakers as the AV Club tested the sound system. On stage, Principal Whitaker stood perfectly poised in her charcoal gray suit, reviewing note cards while conferring with Vice Principal Martinez. The overhead lights caught the silver threads in her dark hair, making them shimmer as she nodded along to whatever Martinez was saying. Mike wiped his hands on his navy work pants and glanced at the clock. The assembly would start in 5 minutes. He should probably head to the back where the other support staff usually stood. But before he could move, Mrs. Carter broke away from her choir and approached him. "Miguel," she said warmly, using his full name like she always did. "I'm glad you're here today." There was something in her eyes, concern maybe, or sympathy, that made his stomach tighten. "Just doing my job, Mrs. C," he replied, managing a small smile. "Making sure everything's set up right." She reached out and squeezed his arm. "You do far more than that, dear. Far more than most people realize." Before he could respond, she was called back to the choir. The final bell rang, and the remaining students hurried to find seats. The gymnasium slowly settled into anticipatory silence as Principal Whitaker approached the microphone. Her heels clicked against the wooden stage, the sound sharp and authoritative. "Good morning, Cedar Ridge," she began, her voice clear and measured. "We've gathered today for an important conversation about hope and about reaching out when we're struggling." She paused, scanning the crowd. "As many of you know, last week one of our own had a close call. They're safe now, thank God. But it's reminded us that we need to do better at supporting each other." Mike leaned against the wall, half listening as she continued. His thoughts drifted to his own dark days, 5 years ago after Maria passed. The nights when Leah's steady breathing in the next room was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. He shook his head slightly, pushing the memories away. The choir performed 2 songs. Gentle, uplifting pieces about light and perseverance. Mike watched the students' faces as they listened. Some looked bored, others thoughtful. A few wiped at their eyes. He recognized the signs of hidden pain in some of their expressions, the same pain he still carried. And now, Principal Whitaker's voice cut through his thoughts. "We have something different planned. Something real." She smoothed her jacket, a gesture Mike had learned meant she was nervous. "Would Mr. Alvarez please join me on stage?" Mike's heart stopped. He must have misheard. But no, heads were turning, students were looking around. Leah sat up straighter in her seat, confusion clear on her face. His feet felt like lead as he made his way to the stage stairs. This wasn't right. He wasn't meant to be visible, to be the center of attention. He was supposed to be in the background, keeping things running smoothly from the shadows. Principal Whitaker's smile was tight as she gestured him to the microphone. In her hand was a folded piece of paper that looked yellowed with age. Mike's blood ran cold as recognition hit him. No, it couldn't be. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent gymnasium, "I believe you have something powerful to share with us today." She held out the paper. "Would you please read this letter? The one you wrote 5 years ago?" The paper trembled slightly in her outstretched hand. Mike stared at it, feeling the world narrow to this single moment. All around the gym, phones began to rise, their camera lenses glinting in the fluorescent light. 800 faces watched in complete silence as his past caught up with him in the most public way possible. In the bleachers, Leah had gone pale, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Mrs. Carter had stopped conducting, her arms frozen mid-motion. Even the usual whispers and shuffles had died away, leaving only the harsh buzz of the overhead lights and the sound of Mike's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He looked at the letter, his suicide note, written on the darkest night of his life, and felt the weight of hundreds of eyes watching, waiting, recording this moment. The sanctuary of his invisible life crumbled around him, as Principal Whitaker stood there, arm extended, holding out his deepest pain for everyone to see. Mike's fingers trembled as he stared at the folded paper in his hands. The gym lights seemed too bright, too harsh, making the yellowed page glow like a spotlight on his darkest moment. His throat went dry as memories of that night crashed over him, 5 years ago. But the pain still felt fresh as yesterday. He had written it at his kitchen table, the house too quiet after putting Leah to bed. The bills had been spread across the wooden surface, red, "Final Notice" stamps glaring up at him. Medical expenses from Maria's illness, mortgage payments he couldn't make, credit card debt that kept growing, it had all felt like drowning in an endless ocean. The pen had shaken in his hand then, just like the paper trembled now. He remembered how the tears had smudged the ink as he'd tried to explain to Leah why he couldn't be strong anymore, why the weight of failing as a husband and father had become too heavy to bear. The shame of that moment burned in his chest, making it hard to breathe. A movement in the bleachers caught his eye. Leah sat there now, 15 years old, her face a mirror of Maria's. She was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. And suddenly he was back in that kitchen, the letter half finished, when he'd heard her small voice. "Daddy, I had a bad dream." That voice had saved him. He'd hidden the letter away and held his daughter until she fell back asleep, her trust in him both a gift and a responsibility he couldn't abandon. The microphone hummed with feedback, jolting him back to the present. Principal Whitaker stood nearby, her expression a mix of anticipation and what might have been regret. Phones were still raised throughout the gymnasium, their lenses like tiny judgmental eyes. Mike looked down at the letter one more time. Then, with deliberate care, he folded it in half, and then in half again. "I won't be reading this today," he said quietly into the microphone, his voice rough but steady. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Instead, I want to tell you about why I'm still here." He slipped the folded note into his pocket and gripped the podium with both hands. 5 years ago, I wrote this letter on the worst night of my life. I'd lost my wife, Leah's mom, to cancer. The medical bills had taken everything. I felt. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I felt like I'd failed everyone who counted on me. The gymnasium was absolutely silent now. Even the usual shuffling and whispers had stopped. In the front row, Mrs. Carter nodded encouragingly, her eyes bright with tears. But I'm standing here today because of 3 things that anchored me to life when I wanted to let go. He held up one finger. First, my daughter's voice reminded me that she needed her father, even a broken one. His eyes found Leah in the crowd, and he smiled softly. Sometimes love isn't about being strong. Sometimes it's just about staying. He raised a second finger. The second thing was a song. Mrs. Carter used to hum it while she worked late in her classroom. This little light of mine? His voice cracked slightly. Some days, that light feels mighty small, but even a tiny flame can help someone find their way home. Mike reached into his other pocket and pulled out his custodian's key ring. And third, this key. It's special because it only opens doors from the inside. He held it up so it caught the light. That's important. Sometimes we get locked in dark places, in our minds, in our hearts. But the key to getting out? It's always been inside us. We just need help remembering how to use it. Tears were flowing freely now, not just from students, but from staff members along the walls. Mrs. Carter had moved closer to the stage, her choir humming softly behind her, providing a gentle foundation for his words. So if you're carrying around your own version of this letter, Mike patted his pocket where the note lay folded. I want you to know something. Your life has value. Your pain is real, but it's not forever. And you are not, his voice grew fierce with conviction, you are not failing just because you're struggling. He straightened up, shoulders back, no longer the invisible janitor, but a man sharing his hard-won truth. I'll be in the cafeteria after school today. Anyone who wants to write an instead note, one sentence about why you choose to stay, can join me. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just show up for one more day. The silence held for a moment longer. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the bleachers, a single set of hands started clapping. The applause spread like a wave, growing until it thundered against the gym walls. Students were standing, some wiping their eyes, others hugging their friends. As Mike stepped back from the microphone, he saw dozens of students already moving toward the exits, clearly planning to meet him later. Principal Whitaker touched his arm, her earlier certainty replaced by something that looked like awe. Mrs. Carter's choir had begun singing softly, their harmony wrapping around the room like a warm embrace. In the bleachers, Leah was crying, but her smile shone through her tears. She mouthed the words, "I love you," and Mike felt his own eyes grow wet. He touched his pocket where the old letter lay, no longer a weapon but a reminder. Sometimes the darkest nights lead to the most important dawns. The cafeteria lights cast a gentle glow across the empty tables. Mike stood by the entrance, his heart still racing from the assembly, watching as students trickled in hesitantly. Some walked alone, shoulders hunched and eyes downcast. Others came in small groups, whispering and holding onto each other's sleeves for courage. "Come on in," Mike said softly, gesturing to the stack of bright sticky notes and pens he'd arranged on a table near the door. "Take what you need." Mrs. Carter, the choir teacher, appeared at his side with a reassuring smile. She began humming that same verse she'd once shared with him during his darkest days, the one he'd mentioned in his speech. The gentle melody filled the awkward silence. A tall basketball player Mike recognized as Marcus was the first to step forward. His hands shook slightly as he picked up a blue sticky note and pen. "Just one reason?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right," Mike nodded. "One reason you'll stay for tomorrow. Could be anything, big or small." Marcus thought for a moment, then wrote something quickly. He walked to the far wall and pressed his note firmly against it. Other students leaned forward, curious, but trying not to stare. The note read, "Mom's pancakes on Sunday mornings." Something in the room shifted. A girl with purple hair wiped her eyes and grabbed a pink sticky note. Then another student moved forward, and another. Soon there was a steady stream of teenagers, writing, some crying, some laughing, softly, as they shared their reasons. Mike watched as the walls slowly came alive with color. Each note told its own story. My little sister's first ballet recital next month. To pet more dogs. Because somebody needs to feed the stray cat behind the school. The next Marvel movie. My grandma's hugs. The security guard, Sergeant Harkness, appeared with boxes of tissues. He distributed them quietly, his usual stern expression softened by understanding. Mrs. Carter continued humming, and some students joined in, creating a gentle backdrop to the scratching of pens and rustling of paper. A freshman girl Mike often saw eating lunch alone wrote, "To find out if it gets better." Her friend hugged her tight after she posted it. The basketball team arrived as a group, their usual boisterous energy subdued. They each wrote notes, some taking extra time to find the right words. Their captain added, "Because my team needs me, and I need them." Mike's throat tightened as he watched Maya, the student whose overdose scare had prompted this assembly, walk in with her parents. She looked fragile, but determined as she wrote her note. "Because today proved I'm not alone." The wall was becoming a patchwork quilt of hope. Yellow, blue, pink, and green papers, creating a bright mosaic against the bland cafeteria paint. Some notes were funny, others profound. All of them honest. My dog wouldn't understand why I never came home. The smell of rain on hot pavement, to prove them wrong, because someone else might need my help someday. Star Wars Episode X. Teachers began arriving too. Mrs. Rodriguez from Spanish class wrote, "To see my students grow up and succeed." The cafeteria worker who always gave extra fries to hungry kids added, "Because kindness matters." Mike noticed some students taking photos of the wall with their phones, but not to mock, to remember, to share the hope. A group of seniors started reading the notes aloud softly to a blind student, describing the rainbow of colors and the different handwriting styles. The custodian's closet key felt heavy in Mike's pocket, the one he'd mentioned in his speech, the one that only opened doors from the inside. He understood now why he'd kept it all these years. Sometimes, people needed to be reminded they had the power to open their own doors. Principal Whitaker stood in the doorway, watching. Her earlier authority had melted into something more human, more vulnerable. She caught Mike's eye and gave a small nod before turning away, wiping her cheek. As the evening went on, students who had already written notes stayed to support others. They formed small circles, sharing stories and phone numbers. The school counselor moved quietly among them, handing out cards with hotline numbers and resources. Then Mike saw her, Leah, his daughter, standing at the back of the room. She'd been so quiet since the assembly, and he'd worried about how his public confession might affect her. She held a green sticky note in her hands, turning it over and over. Slowly, Leah made her way through the crowd. Some students smiled at her, knowing she was the janitor's daughter, but there was no mockery in their expressions tonight, only understanding. Mike pretended to organize the sticky note pile, giving her space. From the corner of his eye, he watched as she uncapped a pen and began to write. Her dark hair fell forward, hiding her face, but he could see her shoulders straighten with resolve. Leah walked to the wall, now nearly covered in rainbow squares of hope. She stood on tiptoe, reaching for an empty spot near the top. As she pressed her note firmly in place, Mike finally allowed himself to look. In his daughter's neat handwriting, the green note read, "Because my dad showed me that staying makes miracles possible." Mike and Leah sat at their small kitchen table. The only sounds the quiet scraping of forks against plates and the hum of the ancient microwave that had warmed their dinner. The red checkered tablecloth, a yard sale find from last summer, added a cheerful touch to their simple meal of reheated spaghetti. Mike twirled pasta around his fork, his mind still processing the events of the evening. The wall of colorful notes in the cafeteria had grown until it practically glowed with hope. Even after most students had left, a few had lingered, adding more reasons, more tomorrows to look forward to. Leah pushed her meatballs around her plate, her dark eyes fixed on her father's face. She hadn't touched much of her dinner, which wasn't like her at all. Usually, she'd be telling him about her day, complaining about chemistry class, or sharing the latest drama from her lunch table. Tonight, she just watched him with an intensity that made him wonder what was going through her mind. "The sauce okay?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. "I know it's not as good reheated." "It's fine, Dad." Leah's voice was soft, almost uncertain. She took a small bite, then set her fork down. "That was really brave, what you did today." Mike's hand stilled halfway to his mouth. He lowered his fork slowly. "I just did what felt right in the moment." "But you didn't have to." Leah's fingers traced the pattern on the tablecloth. "Principal Whitaker put you on the spot like that, in front of everyone. You could have just walked away." "Sometimes walking away isn't the answer," Mike said gently. He reached across the table and covered her restless hand with his own. "Sometimes you have to stand your ground and find a different way forward." Leah's eyes glistened. "Like you did that night? When you wrote the—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Mike's chest tightened. He'd never told Leah about the note, about how close he'd come to leaving her. After Sarah's death, after the medical bills and the foreclosure notice, he'd felt so lost. But something had stopped him. The thought of Leah waking up without him, the memory of Mrs. Carter's hymn, and that old custodian's key in his pocket. "I chose to stay," he said simply. "And every day since then, I've found new reasons to keep choosing it." "I saw Maya's note on the wall," Leah whispered. "The one about not being alone anymore." Her voice cracked slightly. "She's my friend, Dad. She sits next to me in art class. How did I not know she was hurting so bad?" Mike squeezed her hand. "Pain can be really good at hiding, honey. What matters is that she knows now, we all know now, that she doesn't have to hide anymore." Leah nodded, but her shoulders remained tense. She withdrew her hand and stood up, gathering their plates even though Mike hadn't finished eating. "I should do my homework. That math test tomorrow, remember?" "Want me to quiz you on equations?" Mike offered, knowing her usual struggle with algebra. "No, I got it." Leah rinsed the plates with more focus than necessary, her back to him. "You should get some rest, Dad. It's been a long day." Mike watched her for a moment longer, sensing there was more she wasn't saying, but he knew his daughter, pushing her to talk before she was ready, would only make her retreat further. "Okay, sweetheart. Don't stay up too late studying." He kissed the top of her head as he passed by, noticing how she leaned into the touch ever so slightly. In his room, Mike changed into his worn pajamas and sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the familiar sounds of their nighttime routine. Leah's footsteps in the hallway, the squeak of her desk chair, the soft music she always played while studying. Soon, his exhaustion caught up with him. The emotional weight of the day pulled him toward sleep, and he drifted off to the distant sound of Leah's music. In her room, Leah waited until she heard her father's steady breathing through the thin wall. She pulled out her phone and opened her messages to Mrs. Carter. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as tears finally spilled onto her cheeks. "Mrs. C," she typed, then deleted it. Started again. "I need to tell you something." Delete. Finally, she took a deep breath and wrote, "It was me. I'm the one who told Principal Whitaker about Dad's note. I found it last month in an old file when I was helping organize the office for community service hours. Maya's been so sad lately, missing more school, not eating lunch. I thought if people knew my dad made it through something like that, maybe it would help her. Maybe someone would finally notice she was drowning. I never meant for Principal Whitaker to ambush him like that. I'm so sorry." Leah's thumb trembled over the send button. The blue light of her phone screen illuminated her tear-streaked face as she added one more line. "Please, don't hate me." She pressed send before she could change her mind, then curled up on her bed, hugging her pillow tight as she waited for Mrs. Carter's response. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the weathered steps of Grace Baptist Church as Mike and Leah made their way up to the food pantry entrance. The old brick building stood warm and welcoming against the crisp autumn air, its stained glass windows catching the light like jewels. Mrs. Carter appeared in the doorway before they could knock, her silver-streaked hair wrapped in a colorful scarf and her arms already opening wide. "There's my angels!" she exclaimed, pulling them both into a hug that smelled of fresh-baked biscuits and lavender. "Morning, Mrs. C." Leah mumbled into the older woman's shoulder, but Mike noticed his daughter didn't pull away as quickly as she usually did from hugs these days. Come in, come in." Mrs. Carter ushered them inside. "The biscuits just came out of the oven, and they're not serving anybody sitting there getting cold." The church basement had been transformed into an efficient food distribution center, with neat shelves lining the walls and volunteers sorting donations at folding tables. But Mrs. Carter's corner, with its small kitchen setup, felt like walking into someone's home. A pot of coffee burbled on the counter, and the smell of butter and honey made Mike's stomach rumble despite their earlier breakfast. Sit, Mrs. Carter insisted, already pulling out chairs at the small table she kept near her prep station. She placed a basket of steaming biscuits between them, golden brown and perfect. Mike watched as Leah picked up a biscuit, turning it carefully in her hands before taking a small bite. His daughter had been unusually quiet since last night, carrying a weight he couldn't quite name. "Now then," Mrs. Carter said, settling into her own chair with a cup of coffee. "I heard about what happened at that assembly." Her dark eyes, kind but keen, studied Mike's face. "How are you holding up, sugar?" Mike stared down at his biscuit, breaking it apart slowly. "I'm okay," he said automatically, then caught himself. Mrs. Carter had known him too long for that. "It was hard, standing up there with that note in my hand, feeling all those eyes." He swallowed. "All those phones. Daddy was brave," Leah said suddenly, her voice small but firm. She hadn't said much about the assembly until now. Mrs. Carter reached across the table and squeezed Mike's hand. "Your daughter's right about that. And you know what else? Those kids needed to see that kind of brave. Not the showy kind, but the real kind. The kind that shows up every day and chooses to stay." Mike felt his throat tighten. "I just hope I didn't make things worse. Principal Whitaker already sent me a warning about liability concerns with those instead notes." Mrs. Carter's expression turned fierce. "Some people wouldn't recognize Grace if it walked up and introduced itself. Those notes are saving lives, Mike Alvarez, and don't you let anyone tell you different." She got up and bustled over to the coffee pot, refilling cups with the precise movements of someone who'd served countless souls in this kitchen. When she returned, her voice was gentler. "You remember that day you came to help fix our old freezer? 5 years ago?" Mike nodded. It had been just weeks after he'd written the note, during the darkest time after losing his wife. "You thought you were just fixing an appliance," Mrs. Carter continued. "But I saw something else that day. I saw a man who was hurting so bad he could barely stand it, but who still showed up to help others. That wasn't weakness then. And what you did on that stage wasn't weakness either." She leaned forward, her eyes bright. That was the spirit moving, plain as day. Leah, who had been quietly demolishing her second biscuit, looked up with interest. Though she didn't share her father's faith, she'd always liked Mrs. Carter's way of talking about it. "And now look what's growing from it," Mrs. Carter went on. "All those young people, finally feeling safe enough to speak their pain, to ask for help." She paused, considering something. "You know what those kids need now? A place. Somewhere quiet but not hidden. Somewhere they can just be." Mike thought of his janitor's closet at school, how he'd gradually transformed it over the years from a cramped storage space into something almost cozy, with a comfortable chair and good lighting. He'd even managed to fit a small electric kettle for his afternoon tea. Mrs. Carter must have read his thoughts. "That cleaning closet of yours," she said. "The one you fixed up so nice. Why couldn't that be a sanctuary? You're there anyway, and the kids already trust you." "The administration," Mike started, "will have to recognize a blessing when they see it," Mrs. Carter cut in firmly. "Sometimes you have to let the light shine first and worry about the paperwork later." She reached out and took one of Mike's hands and one of Leah's. "That wasn't weakness on that stage, it was the spirit. And it's not done moving yet." Monday morning arrived with a heavy mist clinging to Cedar Ridge High's brick walls. Mike pushed his cleaning cart down the main hallway, the squeaky wheel marking his progress like a metronome. The usual morning quiet felt different today, charged with something new. 2 freshman girls, huddled by their lockers, stopped talking the moment he passed. One of them, wearing a bright pink backpack, offered him a timid smile. "Thanks, Mr. Alvarez," she whispered, then quickly looked away. Mike nodded, his throat tight. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone thanked. For years, he'd been practically invisible in these halls, just another part of the building's machinery, like the heating vents or water fountains. But now, everywhere he went, conversations hushed. Eyes followed him. Some students stepped aside respectfully, while others whispered behind their hands. The words "suicide note" floated in his wake like autumn leaves. Near the science wing, a cluster of boys lounged against the wall. One of them, a tall kid in a Letterman jacket, muttered something that made the others snicker. "Hey, it's the suicidal janitor," Mike heard clearly, though he kept his eyes on his work. The morning dragged on. In between classes, Mike collected paper towels from the bathrooms, replaced light bulbs in the library, and tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of his tasks. But the whispers followed. "I heard he tried to jump off a bridge." "No way, my sister said it was pills." "Did you see the video from assembly? I can't believe Whitaker made him do that." In the teacher's lounge during lunch period, Mike could hear the staff gossip through the half-open door as he changed the trash liner in the hallway. "Poor Mike," Mrs. Henderson's voice drifted out. But honestly, what was Rachel thinking, putting him on the spot like that? "Well, the kids are actually talking about mental health now," Mr. Rodriguez replied. "Maybe that's what Whitaker wanted. Still, he's the janitor, not a counselor. What if it triggers someone?" Mike's hands trembled slightly as he tied off the trash bag. He thought of the cafeteria wall, covered in colorful notes of hope. He thought of the students who'd hugged him after the assembly, some with tears in their eyes, whispering, "Me too." The afternoon brought a school board meeting. Mike wasn't required to attend, but curiosity drew him there. He slipped quietly into the back of the library where the meeting was held, still in his gray maintenance uniform. Grant Walker sat at the center of the long table, his expensive suit and carefully styled silver hair marking him as different from the other board members. His presence commanded attention, though Mike noticed how Walker's fingers kept adjusting his tie, a nervous tell. The usual business proceeded. Budget reports, facility updates, curriculum reviews. Then Walker cleared his throat and leaned forward into his microphone. "I'd like to address last week's incident at the Hope Assembly," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "While we appreciate all our staff members, I have serious concerns about allowing individuals without proper credentials to influence our students on sensitive matters." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Mike felt his chest tighten. "Our children's mental health should be handled by trained professionals," Walker continued, "not maintenance staff, however well-meaning they might be." He paused, straightening a paper on the table. "I move that we review our policies regarding staff roles and appropriate boundaries." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the room. Other board members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Mike noticed how Walker didn't look at him directly, though surely he knew Mike was there. Principal Whitaker, seated at the end of the table, pressed her lips together but remained silent. The board president nodded thoughtfully, making a note on his legal pad. "We'll take that under advisement, Mr. Walker," the president said. "Now moving on to the athletic department budget." Mike slipped out before the meeting ended, the industrial keys on his belt loop jingling softly as he walked. The hallways were empty now, the afternoon light slanting through windows onto freshly waxed floors. His footsteps echoed in the quiet space as he headed back to his cart, back to the familiar routine of maintaining order in a world that suddenly felt much more complicated. Walker's words hung in the air like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Mike could feel them following him down the corridor, heavy with the promise of trouble to come. The kitchen in the Alvarez home was small but warm, filled with the simple aroma of boxed mac and cheese bubbling on the stove. Mike stirred the pot with one hand while checking his phone with the other. Text messages from concerned teachers and parents had been trickling in all day, some supportive, others questioning his judgment. Leah sat at their tiny kitchen table, pushing her homework aside. Her dark curls fell forward, hiding her face, as she traced invisible patterns on the worn tablecloth. Mike recognized that posture, She had something on her mind. "Dad?" Her voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the sound of boiling water. "What's up, mija?" Mike turned down the heat and gave the pasta one final stir. "It's about Maya." Leah's fingers stopped their restless movement. "She hasn't been okay for a while now." Mike set down the wooden spoon and turned to face his daughter fully. The worried crease between her eyebrows reminded him so much of her mother. "Tell me what's going on." "She's been skipping lunch. I thought maybe she was just busy with art club, but—" He pulled her backpack closer and retrieved a small black notebook. "She left this in English class today. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I was worried." Mike pulled up a chair next to Leah as she opened the notebook. Maya's usually neat handwriting was jagged and pressed deep into the pages, some words crossed out so forcefully the paper had torn. Dark sketches filled the margins, twisted trees, broken birds, empty rooms. "She writes about feeling invisible." Leah's voice cracked. "About how maybe it wouldn't matter if she just disappeared." She looked up at Mike, eyes shining with tears. "Dad, some of this sounds like your letter." The words hit Mike like a physical blow. He remembered those dark thoughts, how they had circled like hungry wolves during those endless nights after losing Leah's mother. The mac and cheese began to bubble over. Forgotten. Oh shoot. Mike jumped up to rescue their dinner, but his mind stayed with Maya. He'd seen her just that morning, sweeping past his cart with her head down, earbuds firmly in place. Had he missed the signs? How many other kids were walking those halls carrying that same heavy silence? "I tried talking to her," Leah continued, closing the notebook gently. "But she just says she's fine, that it's just poetry. But I've known her since 6th grade, Dad. This is different." Mike divided the mac and cheese into 2 bowls, adding extra pepper to Leah's portion the way she liked it. As he set the food down, he noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "You did the right thing telling me," he said, sitting back down. "Maya needs help, real help. Not just," he gestured vaguely at himself, "not just a janitor with good intentions." "Don't say that," Leah protested. "You helped all those kids at the assembly. You helped me, even when I didn't know how to tell you I was scared about you being gone sometimes." Mike reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm right here, mija. Not going anywhere." They ate in thoughtful silence for a few minutes before Leah spoke again. "Could Maya come to the cafeteria meetings? The ones you're starting for kids who need to talk?" "Of course she can. But first thing tomorrow, I'm talking to Mrs. Carter and the guidance counselor. Maya needs more support than I can give her." The distinctive sound of mail dropping through their slot interrupted the conversation. Usually, Mike would wait until after dinner, but something made him get up to check. Among the usual bills and flyers was an official-looking envelope from Cedar Ridge High School. He opened it standing there in the hallway, the paper knife sharp against his fingertips. The letter was brief, formal, and devastating. "Dear Mr. Alvarez, this letter serves as a formal reprimand regarding your actions during and after the Hope Assembly on October 15th. While your intentions may have been admirable, you significantly overstepped the boundaries of your role as custodial staff. Providing unauthorized counseling services to minors creates serious liability concerns for the district. You are hereby instructed to cease all non-custodial interactions with students immediately. Further violations may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. Sincerely, Cedar Ridge School Board." Mike's hand dropped to his side, the letter crinkling in his grip. The fluorescent kitchen light suddenly seemed too harsh, the hallway too narrow. Everything he'd built over the years, the stable job, the small but comfortable home, the careful routine that kept Leah safe and secure, felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge. "Dad?" Leah called from the kitchen. "What is it?" He couldn't hide this from her. They'd promised no more secrets after that terrible night 5 years ago. But as he walked back to the kitchen, letter in hand, Mike realized this wasn't just about his job anymore. If he lost his position at Cedar Ridge, how would he keep up with the mortgage? Keep Leah in the school she loved, near her friends, near Maya, who needed her? Worse, what if someone decided a man who'd once written a suicide note wasn't fit to be a single parent? Leah took one look at his face and stood up. "What's wrong?" Mike smoothed out the crumpled letter on the table between their cooling bowls of mac and cheese. As Leah read it, her expression shifted from concern to anger. "They can't do this," she said, voice rising. "You're helping people. Maya needs—" "I know, mija." Mike's voice was gentle, but firm. "We'll figure something out. But right now, I need you to understand that things might get complicated." Leah looked up at him, and in that moment, she seemed both younger and older than her 15 years. "Because of what I did? Telling about your letter? No, honey, this isn't your fault. Sometimes doing the right thing stirs up trouble. But that doesn't mean we stop trying." Mike pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake with suppressed tears. Over her head, he stared at the refrigerator door covered with her artwork, her perfect math tests, the calendar marking all their small daily victories. He'd fought too hard for this life to let it slip away now. But as he held his daughter, the school board's letter lay on the table like a shadow between them, its implications clear. He would have to choose between helping kids like Maya and protecting everything he'd built for Leah. The late afternoon sun slanted through the narrow window of Mike's janitor closet, catching dust motes in its golden beam. Mrs. Carter stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the cramped space thoughtfully while Mike cleared away his cleaning supplies. "Lord, it's smaller than I remembered," she said, but her voice held warmth rather than disappointment. Still, the Spirit can work in tight spaces. Sergeant Harkness appeared behind her, his tall frame filling the doorway. He carried a cardboard box filled with extension cords and what looked like Christmas lights. "Reminds me of my first command post in Kuwait. Sometimes the smallest spaces feel the safest." Mike carefully stacked his mop buckets against the far wall. The metal shelving unit squeaked as he shifted it, making more room in the center of the closet. "I know it's not much." "It's perfect," Mrs. Carter interrupted, stepping inside. She ran her hand along the clean cement wall. "These children don't need fancy, they need real." The three of them worked in comfortable silence for a while. Harkness strung the twinkle lights near the ceiling, their soft glow warming the institutional walls. Mrs. Carter arranged 6 folding chairs in a tight circle, leaving just enough space for knees not to bump. Mike cleared his desk in the corner, replacing cleaning schedules with boxes of tissues and a stack of colorful sticky notes. "You sure about this?" Harkness asked, testing the sturdiness of one chair. "Board's already got their eye on you, Mike." Mrs. Carter shot him a look. "Sometimes doing right isn't about being sure. It's about being necessary." Mike nodded, thinking of the growing pile of instead notes still hanging in the cafeteria. These kids need somewhere safe to land, somewhere without cameras or pressure. The door creaked open wider and Principal Whitaker's head appeared. Her usual confident posture was slightly hunched, her face drawn. I wanted to check the setup." She glanced at the lights, the circle of chairs. "Officially, I can't endorse unauthorized counseling sessions." "Good thing we're just having conversation then," Mrs. Carter said firmly. "About hope. About staying." Whitaker's shoulders relaxed slightly. "The board meeting yesterday. Grant Walker is pushing hard against this. Says we're opening ourselves to liability." She turned to Mike. "I'm sorry about the reprimand letter. My hands were tied." Mike met her eyes. "I understand. But I can't stop now. These kids—" "I know." Whitaker touched the wall of sticky notes they'd transferred from the cafeteria. "Just be careful." She slipped away, her heels clicking down the hall. At exactly 3:45, there was a soft knock. Mike opened the door to find Maya standing there, eyes downcast. Behind her were 4 other students: Trevor from the basketball team, Sophia from choir, and 2 freshmen Mike recognized from his morning hallway duties. "Come in," Mrs. Carter said warmly, her voice gentle as summer rain. "There's room for everyone." The students filed in hesitantly, looking around at the transformed space. The twinkle lights cast a soft glow that made the institutional walls feel almost cozy. Trevor, nearly as tall as Harkness, had to duck slightly under the lights. "It's like a secret hideout," one of the freshmen whispered, and some of the tension broke. "That's exactly what it is," Mike said, closing the door. "A safe place to be exactly who you are." They settled into the chairs, knees almost touching in the tight circle. Mrs. Carter pulled out a thermos of hot chocolate and paper cups. Harkness produced a package of cookies. The simple offerings seemed to help the students relax. "So," Mrs. Carter began, her voice warm but steady, "we're here because sometimes staying feels harder than leaving, and on those days, we need each other." Maya's hands trembled around her cup. "I didn't think anyone would notice," she whispered. "I tried to disappear so carefully." "I notice," Mike said quietly. "Every morning when I unlock these doors, I look for each of your faces, and when one is missing, my heart knows." Sophia wiped her eyes. "My mom says I'm too sensitive, that I should just get over it." "Feeling deeply isn't weakness," Harkness said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. "Some of the strongest soldiers I knew were the ones who let themselves feel everything." Mrs. Carter passed around sticky notes and pens. "Let's each write one reason to stay. Just for today. Tomorrow we'll find another." The scratch of pens filled the small space. Trevor stared at his blank note for a long moment before writing. The freshman girl wiped tears as she wrote, but she was smiling. One by one, they stood and added their notes to the wall. "Because my little sister needs her bedtime story. For the spring musical auditions. To see the flowers I planted bloom. Because someone might need me tomorrow. To prove them wrong." Maya was the last to stand. Her hand shook as she pressed her note beside the others. "Because, in this closet, I feel seen." Mrs. Carter began to hum softly, an old spiritual about walking through valleys and finding light. One by one, voices joined in, filling the small space with gentle harmony. Mike looked around the circle at these brave, hurting souls who'd trusted them enough to show up. At Harkness, who'd taken off his badge and was just a man holding space. At Mrs. Meidenexen 51. Carter, whose faith in healing never wavered. The twinkle lights gleamed like stars against the cement walls, transforming an ordinary janitor's closet into something sacred, a harbor in the storm, a place to breathe, to be, to stay. The janitor's closet looked different now. Twinkle lights cast a soft glow across freshly painted mint-green walls. Comfortable second-hand chairs formed a circle where mop buckets once stood. A small electric kettle bubbled in the corner, and the scent of peppermint tea mixed with the faint smell of cleaning supplies. Mrs. Carter sat in her usual spot, her silver hair catching the light. 5 students perched nervously in their chairs. Maya with her arms wrapped tight around herself, 2 freshman boys trying to look tough, and a pair of junior girls who kept exchanging uncertain glances. "Music," Mrs. Carter said, her voice warm and rich, "has a way of reaching places words can't touch. When I was a girl, my mama taught me a song that got me through some mighty dark nights." She closed her eyes and began to hum softly. The melody was simple, like a lullaby, but carried weight in its gentleness. After a few bars, she added words. "Stay one more day, dear heart, stay one more day. The sun will rise, the dark will part. Stay one more day." She opened her eyes and smiled at the group. "Now you try the first line with me." The students shifted awkwardly at first. Maya stared at her shoes. But Mrs. Carter's patience was endless, and her voice invited, rather than demanded. She hummed the opening notes again. This time, Maya's whisper joined in, barely audible. "Stay one more day, dear heart." The junior girls followed, then one of the freshman boys, his voice cracking slightly. By the 3rd repetition, all 5 students were singing softly with Mrs. Carter, the melody growing stronger with each verse. Mike watched from his spot by the door, his heart full. He'd never been much of a singer himself, but even he found himself humming along. "That's it," Mrs. Carter encouraged. "Let it fill you up. When the world gets too loud, this song is your anchor." They practiced for nearly an hour, learning harmonies and adding verses. The tension in the room slowly melted away. Even Maya's shoulders relaxed as she sang. By the end of the week, the Lightkeepers had grown to 12 students. They gathered daily after school, writing their instead notes and learning Mrs. Carter's song. The closet became their sanctuary, a place where pain could be shared and hope rekindled. It was during Thursday's meeting when Jessica, a quiet sophomore, suddenly began breathing hard. Her hands trembled, and her eyes went wide with panic. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't breathe." The other students froze, unsure what to do. But Mrs. Carter didn't hesitate. She started humming their song, soft and steady. One by one, the other students joined in. "Stay one more day, dear heart." The melody wrapped around Jessica like a warm blanket. Maya reached over and took her hand. The group continued singing, their voices blending in the small space while Jessica's breathing slowly steadied. "That's right, honey," Mrs. Carter murmured between verses. "Just breathe with the music." After several minutes, Jessica's color returned to normal. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she managed a shaky smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's what we're here for," Mike said gently. "To hold each other up." Word spread quickly through the school about what had happened in the janitor's closet. The next day, 3 more students asked to join the lightkeepers. In the hallways, kids could sometimes be heard humming Mrs. Carter's song. Even some teachers picked up the melody, though they didn't know its source. The tune became their signal, a quiet reminder that they weren't alone. When someone hummed those first few notes, it meant, "I see you. I'm here. Stay one more day." Mrs. Carter beamed with pride every time she heard it. "Music," she told Mike, "speaks straight to the soul. Sometimes that's exactly what a hurting heart needs to heal." That afternoon, as the students filed out of the closet after another meeting, their voices still carrying traces of the song, Mike noticed Maya lingering behind. She touched one of the "instead" notes on the wall, her own, from that first night in the cafeteria. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked softly. "Yes, child? Could you teach me more harmonies? I want to help others learn the song too." Mrs. Carter's smile could have lit up the whole school. "Of course, honey. That's exactly how hope spreads, one voice at a time." Mike stood back, watching the janitor's closet fill with more students each day. What had started as 5 scared teenagers had grown into something beautiful. Today, 15 kids squeezed into the cozy space, holding paper cups of hot chocolate provided by 2 elderly veterans from the local VFW. "Now remember," Sergeant Harkness said, his weathered hands wrapped around his own steaming cup, "these numbers aren't just for emergencies. Sometimes you just need someone to talk to at 3 in the morning. And that's okay." The students nodded, carefully copying down the hotline numbers onto small cards. Mike noticed how Maya, sitting in the corner, held her card like it was made of gold. Just last week, she'd barely been able to look anyone in the eye. Mrs. Carter's gentle voice filled the room as she taught them another verse of "Stay One More Day." The hymn had become their unofficial anthem, its simple melody carrying hope in every note. "Let's try it together now," she encouraged, and the voices rose hesitantly at first, then stronger. "Stay one more day till morning light, hold on through darkness till stars shine bright." Mike watched as the tension melted from young shoulders. Even the veterans joined in, their deep voices adding richness to the song. He busied himself putting up new QR code posters while they sang. Each black and white square linked to carefully vetted resources, crisis lines, teen support groups, local counselors who offered sliding scale fees. "Mr. Alvarez?" A quiet voice made him turn. It was Jeremy, a sophomore who'd started coming last week. "Could I put my instead note up?" "Of course," Mike smiled, gesturing to the wall that was now a rainbow of sticky notes. Jeremy's hands shook slightly as he pressed his note among the others. "Because my little sister needs someone to braid her hair in the morning." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Students gathered their things, but nobody rushed out. They moved slowly, like they were trying to hold on to the peace in the room just a little longer. "Same time tomorrow?" asked Sarah, adjusting her backpack. "We'll be here," Mike assured her. "We're always here." After the students left, Sergeant Harkness helped Mike straighten up the chairs. "You've started something special here, Mike, the kind of thing we needed when I came back from overseas. Sometimes the smallest spaces hold the most light." Mrs. Carter nodded, collecting empty paper cups. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Who would have thought a janitor's closet could become holy ground?" Mike felt his cheeks warm at their praise. "I just show up," he said simply. "The kids do the real work. Later that afternoon, a reporter from the local news station arrived. Principal Whitaker had approved the interview, though Mike noticed she watched from her office window with an unreadable expression. "Tell us about the Instead wall," the reporter said, gesturing to her cameraman. The wall of sticky notes filled the frame behind them, each one a different color, each holding someone's reason to stay alive. Mike shifted uncomfortably under the bright camera light. "It started with one note," he explained. "Just one reason to stay one more day. Then another student added theirs, and another. Now look." He gestured to the hundreds of notes covering the wall. The reporter read a few aloud. "Because my dog wouldn't understand why I never came home. Because I want to see the ocean someday. Because tomorrow might be better." "They write their own hope," Mike said softly. "We just give them the space to do it." The story aired that evening. Mike watched it with Leah at home, both of them curled up on their worn couch. The segment was beautifully done, showing the transformed closet, the Instead wall, the veterans bringing coffee, and Mrs. Carter leading the group in song. "Dad, you're famous," Leah teased, poking his arm. Mike managed a smile, but something felt off. The attention made him nervous. He'd never meant to be in the spotlight. He just wanted to help kids feel less alone. What if all this publicity attracted the wrong kind of attention? What if it put everything they'd built at risk? His phone buzzed with messages from Mrs. Carter and Sergeant Harkness, both sharing links to the news story. More messages followed from parents and teachers, all positive, all thankful. Still, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that they were balanced on the edge of something bigger than themselves. "You okay?" Leah asked, noticing his distraction. "Yeah, honey." Mike pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Just thinking about tomorrow's meeting. We might need more chairs." The next morning Mike arrived early to find 3 new Instead notes already added to the wall. He read each one carefully, as he did every morning, honoring the trust these kids placed in this small, sacred space. One caught his eye. "Because Mr. Alvarez showed me that staying alive isn't just about being strong, it's about being brave enough to need people." He touched the note gently, then turned to get ready for another day of keeping the light burning, one student at a time. The morning announcement crackled through Cedar Ridge High's speakers, Principal Whitaker's voice carrying an unusual warmth. "Following recent events and careful consideration, we will be hosting a special Hope Night next Friday evening in the gymnasium. All students, staff, and families are welcome to attend." Whispers rippled through the hallways. Mike paused his mopping, letting the familiar pine scent of cleaning solution fill his nose as he listened to the excited chatter around him. "Did you hear? They're letting us do it. The whole choir's gonna perform. My mom says she's definitely coming." In the band room, instruments tuned up with renewed purpose. The drumline practiced a gentle rhythm that echoed down the corridor. Not their usual pep rally thunder, but something softer, steadier, like a heartbeat. Through the door's window, Mike glimpsed Mrs. Carter working with the choir, her hands flowing through the air as she guided them through "Stay One More Day." The preparations transformed the school's usual routine. During lunch periods, kids huddled over poster paper, designing banners for the gym walls. The art department created a special backdrop for the stage, painting it with hundreds of tiny golden lights against a deep blue sky. Even the cafeteria staff got involved, planning to bake special cookies for the event. Principal Whitaker stopped by the janitor's closet that afternoon while Mike was organizing the cleaning supplies. She looked different, less rigid, though still clearly carrying the weight of her position. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, smoothing her blazer. "I wanted to discuss the logistics for Hope Night." Mike set down the bottle of glass cleaner he'd been holding. "Yes, ma'am? The board has agreed to let you speak." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Not about the note, but about what you've started here. The Light Keepers." Mike nodded slowly. "Thank you. That means a lot. Just." Whitaker glanced at the wall of Instead notes, their colors bright against the gray concrete. "Keep it hopeful. We need that right now." Throughout the week, the excitement built. The choir and band practiced during lunch breaks, their music drifting through the halls. Students who'd never spoken to each other worked side by side, hanging streamers and arranging chairs. The veterans from the VFW showed up one afternoon with boxes of donated refreshments, Sergeant Harkness leading them in his wheelchair. Mrs. Carter spent hours after school directing both the school choir and her church choir in joint rehearsals. The blend of young and old voices filled the gym with harmony that made Mike's chest tighten with emotion every time he heard it. Leah threw herself into helping too, though she'd been quiet lately. She worked with the tech club to set up the sound system, her fingers flying over cables and controls with confidence Mike hadn't seen in weeks. When she thought no one was looking, he caught her humming along with the choir's practice. The day before Hope Night, Mike found himself in the gym after hours, doing a final sweep of the floor. The space looked transformed. Strings of white lights crisscrossed the ceiling, turning the utilitarian space into something almost magical. The instead wall had been carefully transferred from the cafeteria to form a backdrop behind the risers where the choir would stand. His footsteps echoed in the empty space as he walked to center court. This was where Whitaker had handed him that note, where everything had changed. Now it would be where he'd stand again, not to read words of despair, but to share something different. That evening, Mike's small kitchen felt warmer than usual as he stood at the stove, flipping grilled cheese sandwiches in his well-worn pan. The familiar sizzle and smell of melting cheese filled the air. Leah sat at their tiny table, sorting through sound equipment cables for the next day. "The tech club tested everything twice," she said, coiling a cable carefully. "We're ready." Mike slid a perfectly golden brown sandwich onto a plate and placed it in front of her. "How many people do they think will come?" "Mrs. Carter says the parking lot might overflow." Leah picked up half of her sandwich, cheese stretching in gleaming strands. "Dad? I heard some kids talking today about how they're alive because of the light keepers." She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "Because of you." Mike sat down across from her with his own sandwich, emotion catching in his throat. "Because of all of us," he corrected gently. "You, Mrs. Carter, everyone who's been brave enough to share their story." He studied his daughter's face, seeing hints of her mother there. "Maybe this really is making a difference." Leah looked up at him then, and for the first time in days, a genuine smile spread across her face. It was small, but it reached her eyes, lighting them up with something that looked like pride. The gymnasium buzzed with an energy Mike had never felt before. Every bleacher seat was filled, and people lined the walls shoulder to shoulder. Handmade banners hung from the rafters, their messages of hope painted in bright colors. "You matter. Stay one more day. We keep the light." Mrs. Carter's choir stood in neat rows on risers near the stage, their matching blue robes catching the overhead lights. In front of them, the school band had set up their instruments, sheet music propped carefully on stands. The air felt electric with anticipation. Mike stood in the shadows beside the stage, his hands fidgeting with his worn custodian's key. His work shirt was freshly pressed. Leah had insisted on ironing it herself. She sat in the front row now, beaming at him with pride. Principal Whitaker approached the microphone. "Welcome, everyone, to our first Hope Night." Her voice carried across the packed gymnasium. "These past weeks have shown us something extraordinary, how a simple act of sharing can light up the darkness." The first hour moved Mike deeply. Students he'd only known from quiet hallway nods stood at the microphone, sharing their stories. Maya, her voice stronger now, spoke about finding help through the lightkeepers. Veterans from the VFW described their own battles with darkness and how community had saved them. Between testimonies, the choir and band performed songs of hope. When they reached the new anthem Mrs. Carter had taught them, the entire gymnasium joined in. "Stay one more day. Let morning light your way. Hold on, we'll walk with you, we'll stay." The simple melody filled every corner of the space, hundreds of voices raised together. Mike noticed tissues being passed down rows, tears flowing freely, but unashamed. Finally, Principal Whitaker returned to the microphone. "And now, the person who sparked this movement with his courage to speak truth instead of darkness. Our own Mike Alvarez." The applause started before he even reached the stage. Mike's legs felt wobbly as he climbed the steps, but when he looked out at the sea of faces, he saw only family. These were his kids, the ones he'd mopped up after, the ones who'd trusted him with their pain, the ones who'd found hope in a converted janitor's closet. He pulled the custodian's key from his pocket, holding it up so it caught the light. The gymnasium fell silent. 5 years ago, I wrote a different kind of note, Mike began, his voice soft but clear. But that's not the story that matters. What matters is what happened instead. He turned the key between his fingers. This simple key, it opens doors from the inside. So do you. He paused, looking at the faces before him. Every time you share your story, you unlock something in someone else. Every time you reach out, you open a door. Every time you choose to stay one more day, you become someone else's light. The choir hummed softly behind him, the melody of their anthem providing a gentle foundation for his words. I'm just a janitor, Mike continued, but I've learned something cleaning these halls. The messes we think define us, they can be cleaned up. The marks we think are permanent, they fade with care and time. And the doors we think are locked forever? He held up the key again. They can open, from the inside. Mrs. Carter stepped forward then, leading the choir in a full rendition of their anthem. This time, when the voices rose, they carried something more than hope. They carried certainty, the certainty that no one in that room would ever walk alone again. Students began standing, swaying with the music. Parents wiped tears. Teachers reached for each other's hands. The veterans stood at attention, their eyes glistening. Even Principal Whitaker dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. As the final notes faded, the applause began. Not polite clapping, but the kind of thunderous response that comes from hearts too full to stay quiet. Students surged forward, surrounding the sign-up table for lightkeepers. The instead wall, at the back of the gym, quickly filled with new notes, each one a promise to stay, to hope, to keep the light. Mike found himself surrounded by hugs and thank yous, but his eyes sought out Leah, who pushed through the crowd to throw her arms around him. "Dad," she whispered, "you did it." He held her close, watching as more and more people added their names to the lightkeepers list. For this shining moment, in this packed gymnasium full of love and hope, everything felt possible, everything felt healed. Mrs. Carter appeared beside them, squeezing Mike's shoulder. The choir continued to hum softly in the background, their melody weaving through the joyful chaos like a golden thread of hope. Mike arrived early as usual the next morning, jingling his ring of keys as he made his way down the quiet hallway. The sunrise hadn't quite reached the windows yet, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped floors. He rounded the corner toward his supply closet and stopped dead in his tracks. Harsh black letters screamed from his locker. "Too broken to help." The spray paint was still tacky, drips running down the metal like tears. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the cruel words. "Oh, Mike." Mrs. Carter's voice came soft behind him. She'd arrived early to set up for choir practice, and now stood clutching her sheet music to her chest. "Who would do such a thing?" Mike forced a weak smile. "Nothing a little paint thinner won't fix." But his voice cracked slightly. He'd spent years being invisible in these halls. Now his vulnerabilities were literally written on the walls. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another notification. Since the Hope Night's success, his social media had exploded with friend requests and messages. Most were supportive, but lately the tone had shifted. He pulled out his phone and immediately wished he hadn't. The latest post showed a photoshopped image of him in robes, holding his mop like a staff. "Custodian Christ thinks he can save everyone." The caption sneered. "Guy can't even save himself from bankruptcy." Someone had dug up his old foreclosure records from after Maria's death. The comments were worse. "Playing therapist without a license? Creepy. Who lets a suicidal janitor counsel kids? Probably just wanted attention." Mrs. Carter gently took his phone and turned it off. "Those people don't know your heart," she said firmly. "Don't let them steal your peace." But peace felt far away as Mike started his morning routine. Students whispered as he passed, some pointing at their phones. He kept his head down, focusing on his work, but couldn't help overhearing snippets. "Did you see what they posted about him? I heard he's basically homeless. My mom says we shouldn't trust him with kids. By lunchtime, the graffiti was gone, but the damage was done. Mike's sanctuary, the supply closet turned safe haven, felt exposed and vulnerable. He sat alone inside during his break, turning his old custodian's key over and over in his hands. Principal Whitaker stopped by, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. "We'll find who did the graffiti," she promised, "and the IT department is working to trace those posts." Mike nodded wearily. "It's not just me I'm worried about. Leah." "I know," Whitaker said softly. "The counselors are monitoring the situation. We'll keep an eye on her." But they couldn't shield Leah from everything. When the final bell rang, Mike found her curled up in the library corner, her phone clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Dad?" Her voice was small, younger than her 15 years. "Can we go home?" In the car, she was unnaturally quiet. Mike glanced over, noting her rigid posture and the way she kept checking her phone despite flinching each time. "Want to tell me what's going on, Mija?" Leah's lower lip trembled. "They're saying horrible things, about you, about us." She turned her phone to show him. Someone had created a cruel meme comparing them to homeless beggars. The comments mocked their small apartment, their second-hand clothes, their struggle to get by on a janitor's salary. "Someone posted our address," she whispered. "They're calling you a fraud, saying you're unfit." Her voice broke completely. Mike pulled into their parking spot and turned to his daughter. In that moment, she looked so much like Maria, the same dark eyes full of hurt, the same defensive hunch of her shoulders. "Leah, look at me," he said gently. "Those people don't know us. They don't know how strong you are, how brave." "I'm not," the words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "I'm scared all the time. Scared they'll take me away. Scared you'll lose your job. Scared." She choked on a sob. "Scared you'll give up and leave me like you almost did before." Mike's heart shattered. He reached across the console and pulled his daughter close as she broke down completely. Her tears soaked his work shirt as she clung to him, her whole body shaking with the force of her sobs. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "Never. You hear me? Never." They sat there in the gathering dusk, father and daughter holding on to each other while the cruel digital world raged outside their small car. Mike stroked Leah's hair just like he used to when she was little, humming the lullaby Maria had loved until her breathing steadied. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he ignored it. Right now, nothing mattered except this: his daughter in his arms, needing her father's strength. He might be just a janitor, but this he could do. This he would always do. Mike sat in Principal Whitaker's office, his work boots leaving dusty marks on her pristine carpet. The morning sunlight streaming through her window felt too bright, too harsh. On her desk lay a printed stack of social media comments and what looked like formal complaints. "I want you to understand," Whitaker said, her fingers drumming nervously on her desk, "that this isn't personal." She wouldn't meet his eyes. Before she could continue, a sharp knock interrupted them. Grant Walker strode in without waiting for a response, his expensive suit and carefully styled gray hair a stark contrast to Mike's worn uniform. "Ah, good. You're addressing the situation," Walker said, settling uninvited into the chair beside Mike. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The board has received some concerning reports." Mike's stomach clenched. "What reports?" Walker pulled out his phone, scrolling with exaggerated concern. "Multiple parents have expressed worry about unauthorized counseling sessions in a janitor's closet. Students sharing intimate details with an untrained staff member. Private meetings behind closed doors." He paused meaningfully. "It creates liability issues." "Those kids needed someone to listen," Mike said quietly. "They were hurting. Precisely why they should see licensed professionals," Walker countered smoothly. "Not a custodian playing therapist. There are boundaries, Mr. Alvarez." Whitaker cleared her throat. "Mike has helped a lot of students, and we're grateful for his enthusiasm," Walker cut in. "But good intentions don't protect the district from lawsuits. Or worse, if something tragic happened on our watch." He turned to Mike, voice dripping with false sympathy. "What if a student you counseled attempted suicide? the liability alone. Mike's hands gripped his knees. This isn't about liability. Those kids trust me. Which is exactly the problem, Walker said sharply. You've created inappropriate emotional dependencies. Students should rely on qualified professionals, not maintenance staff. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Walker, I really don't think— The board has already voted, Walker interrupted. Until a full review is completed, Mr. Alvarez is suspended with pay. He smiled thinly. For his own protection, of course. Mike felt the room spin slightly. Suspended? But the Lightkeepers meeting tonight is canceled, Walker said firmly. As are all unauthorized gatherings in custodial spaces. We'll be changing the locks today. Dana? Mike turned to Whitaker, using her first name for the first time in years. Please, those kids need consistency. They need to know they can count on us to be there. Whitaker wouldn't meet his gaze. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed a paper across her desk. I'm sorry, Mike. The suspension is effective immediately. Please sign here. Mike stared at the document, remembering all the tear-stained faces that had found hope in his closet sanctuary, all the instead notes covering the walls, all the quiet conversations that had pulled kids back from the edge. What happens to them? He asked softly. The school counselors will handle any students in crisis, Walker said dismissively. Now, if you'll surrender your keys— Mike's hand shook as he placed his key ring on Whitaker's desk. The familiar weight of the custodian's key, the one that only opened doors from the inside, felt like lead in his palm. We'll need your badge as well, Walker added with clear satisfaction. Mike unpinned the plastic ID that had identified him as part of Cedar Ridge High for the past 7 years. He placed it beside his keys, then signed the suspension notice with numb fingers. Security will escort you to collect any personal items, Walker said, standing. And Mr. Alvarez? I'd advise against contacting any students during your suspension, for everyone's protection. Mike walked out in a daze, barely registering the sympathetic looks from other staff members as a security guard followed him to clear out his locker. The cruel graffiti from that morning was still visible despite his attempts to clean it. He drove home in silence. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the empty house. Mike sat at his scratched wooden table, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. His suspension letter lay crumpled beside an empty coffee mug, and in his trembling hands he held the worn piece of paper that had started it all, his suicide note from 5 years ago. He'd kept it folded in his wallet all this time, a reminder of his darkest moment. Now, as the walls seemed to close in around him, the familiar weight of despair settled on his shoulders. The CPS visit this morning had shaken him to his core. They'd questioned Leah for over an hour while he waited, helpless, in the next room. Maybe Walker was right, Mike whispered to the empty kitchen. Maybe I am too broken to help anyone. His fingers traced the creased edges of the paper. The words he'd written that night were still there, ink slightly faded but legible. He remembered writing them at this very table, after Leah had gone to bed, convinced his daughter would be better off without him. The house felt too quiet. Usually at this hour he'd be at school, pushing his mop down familiar hallways, checking in on kids who needed a smile or a kind word. The janitor's closet, their sanctuary, would be waiting for after-school meetings. But now— Mike unfolded the first crease of the note. His hands shook harder. What if they were all right? What if he was just fooling himself, thinking a broken-down janitor could save anyone? The words beckoned to him, promising to confirm every doubt, every fear. The second crease came undone. He could almost hear Walker's voice. Uncredentialed, liability, danger to students. The third fold opened like a wound. Mike's throat tightened as he began to read the first line. To my dearest Leah. A gentle knock at the door startled him. He quickly tried to refold the paper, but his fingers fumbled. The knock came again, followed by a familiar voice. Miguel Alvarez? I know you're in there, Mrs. Carter called out. And I know you're not answering your phone on purpose. Mike stayed silent, but Mrs. Carter wasn't deterred. I brought my famous sweet potato pie, she continued. And I'm not above sitting on these porch steps all afternoon, singing hymns at the top of my lungs until you let me in. Despite himself, Mike's lips twitched. Mrs. Carter had done exactly that once before, 3 days after his wife's funeral, when he'd refused to leave the house. The neighbors had eventually called to complain about the singing. "The pie's getting cold," she added, her voice gentle but firm. Mike pushed back from the table, the legs scraping against the floor. He walked to the door, note still clutched in his hand, and opened it. Mrs. Carter stood there, pie in hand, her silver hair catching the sun. Her eyes took in his rumpled appearance, the dark circles under his eyes, and the paper in his grip. Her expression softened with understanding. "Oh, child," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She set the pie on the counter and turned to face him. "What are you doing with that old burden?" Mike's throat felt tight. I thought maybe they were right. About me. About all of it." Mrs. Carter's eyes flashed. "Those fool board members? That snake Walker?" She shook her head firmly. "No, sir. We're not letting them write your story." She reached for the note in his hand, but he pulled back. "Mrs. Carter, you don't understand. CPS came this morning. They're investigating me. I could lose Leah." His voice cracked. "I could lose everything. And you think reading this old pain will help?" She gestured at the note. "Those words aren't you anymore, Miguel. They never were. They were grief-talking, fear-talking, but they weren't truth." Mike sank back into his kitchen chair, the fight leaving him. "Then what is the truth? Because right now, I don't know anymore." Mrs. Carter pulled up a chair beside him. Her presence filled the kitchen with warmth, chasing away some of the shadows. She placed her hand on his shoulder, her touch steady and grounding. "The truth?" she said softly. "The truth is in that closet full of hope notes. It's in those children's eyes when they finally feel seen. It's in that key you hold up. The one that opens doors from the inside." She squeezed his shoulder. "The truth is in every single life you've touched. Every soul you've helped anchor to this world." Then, in her rich alto voice, she began to sing their anthem. "Stay one more day, child. Stay one more night. The dawn is coming. Just hold on tight." The familiar melody wrapped around Mike like a blanket. His grip on the note loosened slightly. Mrs. Carter's voice filled the kitchen, strong and sure, a lifeline in the dark. But before she could start the second verse, the front door burst open. Leah stood in the doorway, face flushed, eyes wide with panic. "Dad," she gasped, clutching her phone. "It's Maya. She's gone." Mike stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. "What do you mean? Gone?" "She posted online. It's like a goodbye message." Leah's voice shook. "No one can find her. She's not answering her phone. Dad, I think she's going to." The note in Mike's hand suddenly felt like it was burning. Without hesitation, he crumpled it into a ball and threw it in the trash. His daughter needed him. Maya needed him. This was no time for old ghosts. The streetlights cast yellow pools on empty sidewalks as Mike's old pickup truck crawled through Cedar Ridge's back streets. Sergeant Harkness sat beside him, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of his phone as he coordinated with other search teams. "Mrs. Carter's group is covering the park," Harkness reported, his voice gruff with concern. "Church folks are checking the mall parking lots. No sign of her yet." Mike's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The night air coming through his cracked window was sharp with autumn chill, but he barely noticed. His mind kept replaying Maya's last Instagram post. Just 3 words. "I'm done fighting. Take a left here," Harkness directed, pointing down a narrow road that wound toward the old railroad bridge. "Kids sometimes go there to think." The truck's headlights swept across overgrown weeds and scattered beer cans. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been in this exact position 5 years ago, sitting in his car with that note in his pocket, looking for a quiet place to. "Stop," Harkness commanded suddenly, sitting up straight. "Cut the lights." Mike killed the headlights. In the sudden darkness, he could make out a small figure perched on the bridge's metal railing about 50 yards ahead. Maya's hoodie was pulled up against the wind, but he'd recognize that purple backpack anywhere. "Easy now," Harkness murmured, as Mike reached for his door handle. "No sudden moves. Let me radio this in." His fingers flew across his phone, sending updates to the search teams. They approached slowly, their footsteps crunching on gravel. Maya didn't turn around, but her shoulders tensed, showing she heard them. It's just us, honey, Mike called softly, stopping about 20 feet away. Mr. Alvarez and Sergeant Harkness. Maya's voice came back thin and brittle. Please, go away. Can't do that, Maya, Harkness replied, his usual gruffness gentled. Too many people care about you. A bitter laugh escaped her. Right, that's why my mom's passed out drunk again? Why my dad's new family doesn't want me around? Her feet dangled over the dark water below. Nobody even noticed I was falling apart until Leah said something. Mike took one careful step closer. I notice you, Maya. I see how you leave poetry in the margins of your notebooks. How you sketch beautiful things during lunch when you think no one's watching. How you always save half your sandwich for that freshman who never has lunch money. Maya's shoulders shook. That doesn't matter. None of it matters. It all matters, Mike insisted. Every single bit of light you put into the world matters. A car approached on the road below the bridge, its headlights sweeping across the water. In that brief illumination, Mike saw tears streaming down Maya's face. I can't keep pretending I'm okay, she whispered. It hurts too much. Then don't pretend, Harkness said. Be honest, be angry, be scared, but be here. More vehicles were arriving now. Police cars with lights off, Mrs. Carter's minivan, other search team members. They kept their distance, forming a loose circle of silent support. Then a new voice called out, Maya, wait! Leah appeared, running up the bridge path with her phone's flashlight bouncing. Maya finally turned her head slightly. Look, Leah panted, holding up her phone screen. Remember this? The QR code from Lightkeepers? Click it, please. Maya hesitated, then slowly pulled out her phone with one hand, still gripping the railing with the other. The soft blue light illuminated her tear-stained face as she scanned the code. Her phone began playing the gentle melody of Stay One More Day, the hymn Mrs. Carter had taught them. Then, testimonies started playing, voice after voice of students and staff sharing their own stories of choosing to stay. There's a number there, too, Leah said quietly. Someone's always waiting to talk, someone who gets it. Maya's finger hovered over her screen. The hymn's chorus swelled softly in the night air. Morning comes, hold on until morning comes. With trembling hands, Maya pressed the number. A gentle voice answered immediately on speaker. You're not alone. I'm here. I don't want to die, Maya choked out. I just want the pain to stop. I understand, the crisis counselor replied warmly. Can you tell me more about that? Maya's shoulders slumped, the rigid tension finally leaving her body. Could someone help me down first? Harkness moved forward carefully, his strong hands steady as he helped Maya climb back over the railing. As soon as her feet touched the bridge, Mrs. Carter wrapped her in a thick blanket while the counselor continued speaking softly through the phone. Mike watched as the group slowly walked Maya toward the waiting ambulance, its lights still dark to maintain the calm. Leah slipped her hand into his and squeezed. The code worked, she whispered. Just like you said it would. Mike pulled his daughter close, his heart still racing but now with relief instead of fear. They had found her. The night hadn't won. Through the open phone line, they could still hear the hymn playing faintly. Morning comes, morning comes. And in the east, the first pale light of dawn began to streak the sky. The morning sun crept through Mike's kitchen window, casting tired shadows across the scratched linoleum floor. His bones ached from the long night, but relief outweighed exhaustion. Maya was safe. That's what mattered. He sat at his small kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled janitor's uniform, when 3 gentle knocks echoed from the front door. Come in, Mrs. Carter, he called out. Recognizing her distinctive pattern, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Carter's warm presence filled the modest space. She carried a covered basket that released wisps of steam, and the rich aroma of fresh coffee drifted behind her like a welcome ghost. Thought you might need some sustenance, child, she said, setting down the basket and pulling out a thermos. Her silver hair caught the morning light as she moved around his kitchen with familiar ease, gathering mugs from the cabinet. You didn't have to, Mike started, but she waved him quiet. Hush now. After what you did last night? These biscuits are the least I can do. She placed a warm, flaky biscuit on a paper napkin in front of him. "Maya's mama called me this morning. That child is getting the help she needs now." Mike nodded, throat tight. He picked at the biscuit, watching crumbs scatter across the napkin. "I just wish." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I wish I could have done more, before it got to this point." "You did plenty," Mrs. Carter said firmly, settling into the chair across from him. "That QR code you made? That's what got her to call for help. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference." The morning quiet was interrupted by the buzz of Mike's phone. He reached for it wearily, expecting another message from the school board about his suspension. Instead, he found a text from Sergeant Harkness. "Need to see you. Found something interesting about that CPS call. Can you come by the station?" Mrs. Carter leaned forward, reading his expression. "What is it?" Mike showed her the message. "Could be nothing," he said, but hope flickered in his chest for the first time in days. "Eat your biscuit first," Mrs. Carter insisted. "Then, we'll go together." 20 minutes later, they walked into the police station. The fluorescent light seemed harsh after the gentle morning sun, and the smell of industrial cleaner reminded Mike painfully of his suspended job at the school. Sergeant Harkness met them in the lobby, his face set in serious lines. "Thanks for coming," he said, leading them to a small conference room. "You're going to want to sit down for this." He spread several papers across the table. "Remember Officer Martinez? She works part-time dispatch for CPS after hours. She recognized the voice that made the call about Leah. It's Jennifer Rollins." Mike frowned. "Who's that?" "Grant Walker's executive assistant," Harkness explained. "And here's where it gets interesting." He pointed to a printed email. "This was forwarded to me by someone on the school board who's not too happy with Walker's methods. Look at the timestamp." Mike and Mrs. Carter leaned forward. The email was from Walker to Jennifer Rollins, sent just hours before the CPS call. "Need leverage on the custodian situation. Use whatever means necessary. Personal angle might be most effective." Mrs. Carter's hand found Mike's shoulder, squeezing gently. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she murmured, "but sometimes he leaves a paper trail." "Martinez recorded the call, standard procedure," Harkness continued. "The voice analysis matches Rollins and the allegations she made." He shook his head in disgust. "Completely fabricated. We've got her on filing a false report, and Walker's email proves premeditation." Mike sat back, stunned. The weight that had been crushing his chest began to lift slightly. "So what happens now?" "Now," Harkness said, gathering the papers into a neat stack, "we take this to the district attorney, and the school board needs to see it too. Walker's been playing dirty politics for years, but this crosses several legal lines." Mrs. Carter's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "He tried to use a child, 2 children, counting Maya, as pawns in his little power game. That man needs to learn about consequences." Mike stared at the evidence spread before him. Emails, voice analysis reports, witness statements. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the papers. Physical proof that the nightmare of the past few days hadn't been his fault. "Thank you," he said quietly to Harkness, "for looking deeper, for not just accepting what you were told." Harkness's weathered face softened. "That's what community means, Mike. We look out for our own. Speaking of which," he pulled out his phone, showing them a new text. "The kids have started a petition, over 300 signatures already, demanding your reinstatement. Seems like your lightkeepers aren't going down without a fight." Mrs. Carter's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "See? Light always finds a way through the darkness. Always." Mike carefully organized the documents, his mind racing with possibilities. After days of feeling powerless, of watching his life's work and his relationship with his daughter threatened, he finally had something solid to fight back with. "I need to call Leah," he said, standing up. "She needs to know." "That her daddy's name will be cleared?" Mrs. Carter finished for him. "That sometimes justice comes through unexpected channels? That love is stronger than fear?" "All of that?" Mike nodded. "And that we're not alone. We were never alone." Mike stood outside Principal Whitaker's office, his hand hovering over the worn brass doorknob. Through the frosted glass, he could see her silhouette bent over her desk. His stomach tightened. This was the woman who had put him on stage with his note, who had suspended him, who had stayed silent while his world crumbled. But something in her posture looked different today. Defeated. He knocked softly. "Come in." Her voice wavered, lacking its usual sharp edge. The office looked exactly as it always had. Meticulously organized with certificates lining the walls, everything in its proper place. But Whitaker herself seemed disheveled. Her usually perfect blazer wrinkled, her makeup slightly smudged. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, not meeting his eyes. I heard about Maya. Thank you for finding her." "I wasn't alone," Mike replied quietly. "The whole community came together." Whitaker's hands trembled as she shuffled papers on her desk. "Please, sit down." Mike lowered himself into one of the stiff chairs facing her desk. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I need to tell you something," Whitaker finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "I've never shown this to anyone." Mike's heart skipped a beat as she unfolded it. The creases were worn, like it had been opened and refolded countless times. "I wrote this 3 years ago," she said, smoothing the paper with shaking fingers. It's my note." The revelation hit Mike like a physical blow. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the pressed clothes and perfect posture to the pain she'd been hiding. "Depression doesn't care about success or status," she continued, her voice cracking. "I had just been promoted to principal. Everything looked perfect on paper. But inside," she pressed her hand to her chest. "Inside, I was drowning." Tears began sliding down her cheeks, smearing her mascara. "When I found your note in that old HR file, I recognized myself in those words. And then I heard about Maya, about the other students struggling, and I panicked. I thought if someone like you, someone strong enough to choose life, could share their story." She buried her face in her hands. "I handled it all wrong. I humiliated you. I let Grant Walker manipulate me because I was afraid of losing control. I'm so sorry, Mike." Mike sat in stunned silence, watching as Principal Whitaker's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. The woman who had seemed so coldly bureaucratic was falling apart before his eyes. "I keep my note in my desk," she admitted, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "Some days, just knowing it's there, it's like a weight. But I can't throw it away. It reminds me how close I came, how fragile we all are." Mike leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Dana, why didn't you tell me?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Tell you? The custodian I was supposed to be supervising? The man whose job I was threatening?" She shook her head. "I'm the principal. I'm supposed to have all the answers." "Nobody has all the answers," Mike said softly. "That's why we need each other." Whitaker stood up suddenly, pacing behind her desk. "When I asked you to read your note at the assembly, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was desperate. I thought if someone else was brave enough to speak about it, maybe I could finally face my own darkness." She stopped, gripping the back of her chair. "But instead of reading it, you showed us all how to choose life. And I've been too much of a coward to follow your example." Mike stood and walked to her side of the desk. "It's not about courage, it's about connection. About knowing we're not alone." "The board meets tomorrow," she said, her voice steadying slightly. "They're going to try to shut down Lightkeepers. Grant Walker has been gathering supporters." Mike felt his heart sink, but before he could respond, Whitaker straightened her shoulders. "I won't let them," she declared. "I'll stand with you. I'll tell them everything. About my note, about how I mishandled the assembly, about how Walker manipulated the situation." She met Mike's eyes. "I've been hiding in shame for too long. Maybe it's time I opened my own door from the inside." A lump formed in Mike's throat as he recognized his own words from Hope Night. He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. "Thank you," he said simply. Whitaker nodded, then reached for a tissue to dab at her eyes. "The students need Lightkeepers. I need it too, if I'm being honest. We can't let fear and shame win. Not when lives are at stake." The school board meeting room had never seen such a crowd. People packed every corner, spilling out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over faces both familiar and new. Teachers clutching coffee cups, parents still in work uniforms, veterans in their VFW caps, and students wearing handmade Lightkeepers badges. At the front, 7 board members sat behind their elevated desk, Grant Walker's empty seat a conspicuous gap. Principal Whitaker occupied a chair to the side, her posture stiff, but her eyes clear and determined. Mrs. Carter stood at the podium, her silver hair gleaming, her voice carrying with the power of decades in the church choir. "I've buried too many children in my lifetime," she began, gripping the wooden edges. "Too many funerals where folks whisper, 'If only we'd known.' Well, now we know. These children are crying out, and Lightkeepers answers." She gestured to the crowd behind her. "Look at these faces. Every person here has a story about hope found in that little janitor's closet, about a phone call that came just in time, about a hymn that kept the darkness at bay for one more day." Her voice cracked slightly, but her spine remained straight. "You want credentials? I'll tell you about credentials. Mike Alvarez has a PhD in compassion, earned in the trenches of his own battles. Every veteran here has a master's degree in survival. These students, they're teaching us all about courage." From the back, someone started humming their anthem. The sound spread, soft but unstoppable, until it filled the room with gentle harmony. Maya stepped up next, her hands shaking but her chin high. "3 weeks ago, I was ready to give up," she said. "I had a plan, but because of Lightkeepers, because of Mr. Alvarez and Mrs. Carter and everyone who kept showing up, I'm still here. I'm not the only one." One by one, they approached the microphone. A cafeteria worker described finding hope notes in lunch trays. A veteran spoke about late-night calls answered. Parents shared stories of children who smiled again, who opened up, who came back to life. Sergeant Harkness, his VFW cap clutched in weathered hands, described the hotline system they'd established. "In my 30 years of service," he said gruffly, "I never saw a more effective ground operation. These kids know how to spot trouble and get help fast. They're saving each other." The line of speakers seemed endless. Students spoke of panic attacks, soothed by hymns, of friendships forged across cliques, of darkness held at bay by community. Teachers admitted their own struggles, thanking the movement for showing them they weren't alone. Through it all, Mike sat quietly, Leah's hand wrapped tightly in his. He watched tears stream down faces, saw heads nodding in recognition, felt the power of truth filling the sterile room with something sacred. Finally, Dr. Sarah Chen, the district's head counselor, approached the podium with a stack of papers. Her clinical tone cut through the emotional atmosphere with necessary precision. "I've compiled 3 months of data," she began, adjusting her glasses. "The numbers are unambiguous. Since Lightkeepers began, we've documented exactly 100 interventions that prevented potential loss of life." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dr. Chen continued. "These include 28 direct suicide preventions, 42 crisis hotline interventions that required immediate response, and 30 cases where students sought help for friends showing serious warning signs." She laid her papers down deliberately. "In my 15 years as a mental health professional, I have never seen such effective peer-to-peer intervention. The combination of trained adult supervision, community support, and student engagement has created something remarkable." The room erupted. People leaped to their feet, crying and hugging. The choir broke into their anthem at full volume, and even some board members wiped their eyes. 100 lives. 100 reasons to believe. 100 proofs that compassion could overcome bureaucracy. Mrs. Carter's voice rose above the chaos, strong and clear. "This is what healing looks like." The veterans stood at attention, tears tracking down weathered cheeks. Students who'd testified clutched each other, their faces shining with vindication and hope. In that moment, the numbers transformed from statistics into a symphony of survival. Each digit represented a breath still breathing, a heart still beating, a story still unfolding. The data couldn't capture the late-night texts, the quiet conversations, the moments when someone chose to stay simply because they weren't alone. But it proved, in language, the board couldn't ignore, that love worked where protocol had failed. A spontaneous receiving line formed around Mike, parents and students wanting to touch his shoulder, squeeze his hand, add their voices to the testimony. But he kept his eyes on the board members' faces, watching realization dawn. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a community that had found its heart again, about a school that had chosen to value souls over systems. The applause continued, washing over the room in waves, carrying with it all the hope and healing of the past months. 100 lives, 100 victories, 100 reasons to keep the light burning. Grant Walker's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he gripped the edge of the board table. The evidence against him lay scattered across the polished wood, printed emails, phone records, and a signed statement from his former assistant confessing to filing the false CPS report at his direction. "This is ridiculous," Walker spat, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "We're letting a janitor run an unauthorized counseling program? He's not qualified to handle student mental health." Boos erupted from the crowd. A parent near the front stood up, pointing an accusatory finger. "My daughter is alive, because of Mike and the lightkeepers." Walker sneered, speaking over the rising voices. "Oh please, this whole thing is a publicity stunt. He's manipulating vulnerable children for attention. I was protecting this district from liability." Mrs. Carter rose slowly from her seat in the front row, her dignified presence commanding attention. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I've spent 40 years in these halls. I've watched children suffer in silence because folks like you were more worried about liability than lives." The room fell quiet, hanging on her words. "You talk about qualifications?" she continued. "Mike has the only qualification that matters, a heart that knows what it means to struggle and survive. While you were writing memos, he was writing instead notes with kids who had lost hope." Walker's lip curled. "How dare you lecture me about—" "No, sir," Mrs. Carter cut him off. "How dare you try to destroy something beautiful because it didn't fit your narrow view of who gets to help and who gets to heal?" Principal Whitaker stood up from her seat among the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I have a confession to make to this board. I, too, have written that kind of note." Gasps rippled through the room. "The difference is, I never found the courage to turn my pain into purpose like Mike did." Walker scoffed. "Oh, wonderful. Now the principal's unstable, too. This is exactly—" "Enough." Board President Chen's gavel cracked against the wood. "Mr. Walker, we have documented evidence that you orchestrated a campaign to discredit a valued employee, filed false reports to Child Protective Services, and violated multiple ethics policies." She shuffled through papers before her. "Furthermore, we have data from the district mental health team showing that the Lightkeepers Initiative has facilitated over 100 successful crisis interventions. 100 children who found help because of the program you tried to destroy." The crowd murmured in approval. Sergeant Harkness, standing near the back in his police uniform, nodded grimly. Walker shot to his feet, his chair scraping across the floor. "This is a witch hunt. I was protecting this district from an unqualified—" "The motion to censure Board Member Walker is on the table," Chen interrupted firmly. "All in favor?" Hands rose around the board table. One by one, Walker's colleagues turned against him. The vote was unanimous. "Motion carries," Chen announced. "Mr. Walker, in light of these serious ethical violations, this board formally censures you and requests your immediate resignation." Walker's face contorted with rage. He snatched his briefcase from the floor, papers spilling out. "You'll regret this. When something happens, and it will, remember who tried to stop this madness." As he stormed toward the exit, Mrs. Carter's voice lifted in song, the same hymn she'd taught the Lightkeepers. "Stay one more day, child. Let love light the way. The night ain't forever. Just stay one more day." One by one, voices joined her. Students, parents, teachers, even those who'd never set foot in her church, lifted the simple melody. The sound swelled, filling the room with harmony as Walker disappeared through the door. The hymn carried all his bitter words away, replacing them with something stronger: hope. Principal Whitaker stood at the podium, her usual polished demeanor softened by something new: vulnerability. The fluorescent lights of the boardroom cast shadows under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights that had led to this moment. "I owe this community an apology," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "Particularly to Mike Alvarez and his daughter." She paused, looking directly at them in the front row. "What I did at the Hope Assembly was wrong. I took someone's private pain and tried to use it as a teaching moment without consent. I thought I was helping, but I was acting out of my own desperation to do something, anything, to address the crisis we face." The room remained silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Parents, students, and staff members packed the space shoulder to shoulder, while others stood along the walls or spilled out into the hallway. "But something extraordinary happened that day," Whitaker continued, her voice growing stronger. "Mike Alvarez showed us what real leadership looks like. When handed his darkest moment, he chose to share hope instead. And look what grew from that seed." She gestured to the walls, where dozens of instead notes had been taped up, even here in the boardroom. Mrs. Carter sat beside Mike, nodding encouragingly. Her church choir members, scattered throughout the crowd, watched with proud smiles. "The data is clear," Whitaker said, lifting a sheet of paper. 100 documented interventions, 100 lives touched. But numbers don't tell the whole story. I've seen students who never spoke now finding their voice. I've watched barriers break down between groups who never mixed before. And She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've found my own healing in this movement." Leah squeezed her father's hand as Whitaker continued. "That's why tonight I'm announcing a formal partnership between Cedar Ridge High School, the Greater Hope Mental Health Coalition, and Blessed Grace Baptist Church." She turned to Mrs. Carter. "Mrs. Carter's congregation has offered to provide after-hours space and volunteer support for our Lightkeepers program." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Several of the veterans from the VFW stood straighter in their uniforms, pride evident in their bearing. "Additionally," Whitaker said, "we're establishing a direct connection with licensed counselors who will provide training and backup support for our peer-to-peer programs. This isn't just about crisis response anymore. It's about building a community that catches people before they fall." Mike watched as several board members nodded along. The same people who had been ready to fire him weeks ago were now leaning forward with interest. But none of this works without the heart and soul that started it all. Whitaker turned to face Mike directly. "Mr. Alvarez, would you please stand?" Mike slowly rose, his work boots scuffing against the carpet. He wore his cleanest janitor's uniform, pressed the night before by Leah. "The board has reviewed your case extensively," Whitaker said. "We've heard testimony from students, parents, and mental health professionals. We've examined the false allegations made against you and found them completely without merit. Tonight, we're not just reinstating you, we're creating a new position that recognizes the vital role you've played." She lifted an official-looking document. "We'd like to offer you the role of Custodian and Community Care Coordinator. This position maintains your current custodial duties, because, as you've shown us, having access to the building's quiet spaces is essential. But it also formally recognizes your role in supervising after-hours safe rooms, coordinating with volunteer groups, and helping train peer support teams." Leah jumped to her feet, unable to contain herself. "Yes, Dad, yes." Her voice cracked with emotion, and several people chuckled warmly. Mike stood frozen, overwhelmed. Mrs. Carter reached up and patted his arm. "Go on," she whispered. "This is your instead." He walked slowly to the podium, where Whitaker held out her hand. As they shook, she spoke quietly, just for him. "Thank you for showing me another way." The board chairman stood next, making it official with a unanimous vote. As the room erupted in applause, Leah ran forward to hug her father. The choir, unable to help themselves, began humming their anthem softly. "Keep the light," Mrs. Carter called out from her seat, and dozens of voices echoed back, "Keep the light." Mike held his daughter close, feeling the weight of his old note finally lift completely. In its place was something new, not just hope, but purpose. Real, official, recognized purpose. Whitaker stepped back, allowing Mike and Leah their moment in the spotlight. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. All around them, people were embracing, crying, laughing. The VFW veterans stood at attention, offering crisp salutes. Students who had once been strangers now held hands and swayed to the choir's gentle humming. Sergeant Harkness made his way forward through the crowd, carrying a small wrapped package. "Here," he said gruffly, handing it to Mike. "From all of us." Inside was a new key ring, engraved with the words, "Opens from the inside." The applause swelled again, drowning out everything except Leah's joyful laughter and Mrs. Carter's strong, clear voice leading the choir in their anthem of hope. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of Cedar Ridge's gymnasium, casting warm squares on the polished floor. The familiar smell of floor wax and fresh paint filled the air as students and staff gathered for the official dedication of the permanent Instead wall. Mike stood back, watching as maintenance workers finished securing the last panel of the enormous glass-covered display. The wall stretched 20 feet wide and 8 feet tall, its surface already dotted with hundreds of colorful sticky notes. Each one carried a message of hope, a reason to stay one more day. Mrs. Carter moved among the growing crowd, her floral dress swishing as she handed out fresh packets of sticky notes. The school choir had positioned themselves in the corner, warming up with soft harmonies that echoed through the space. "Dad!" Leah called out, weaving through the crowd with a stack of blue sticky notes in her hands. "Look what Maya wrote." She held up a note that read, "Because tomorrow might surprise you with something beautiful." Mike's throat tightened as he remembered that night on the bridge, how close they'd come to losing her. Now Maya stood near the wall with her parents, alive and smiling, adding another note to the collection. Principal Whitaker approached the microphone stand, adjusting her blazer. The usual stiffness in her demeanor had softened these past weeks. "If everyone could gather around," she said, her voice carrying across the gym. The crowd shifted forward, conversations quieting to a murmur. "Today we make permanent what began in a moment of crisis," Whitaker continued. "But this wall represents more than just hope. It represents community, understanding, and the power of speaking up when darkness feels overwhelming." The choir began to hum softly, the familiar melody of "Stay One More Day" weaving through the air. Students instinctively swayed, many mouthing the words they'd come to know by heart. Sergeant Harkness stood near the back, his usually stern face gentle as he watched several of his veterans distribute pens and papers. They'd become regular fixtures at the school, these tough men who'd found new purpose in protecting young lives. Mike felt a gentle touch on his arm. Mrs. Carter stood beside him, pressing a single sticky note into his palm. "Your turn," she whispered, her eyes twinkling. He looked down at the blank yellow paper, remembering that first night in the cafeteria when dozens of trembling hands had posted their reasons to live. Now, watching people step forward one by one to add their notes, he saw how that simple act had grown into something profound. Leah tucked herself under his arm as he wrote. His handwriting was neat and clear. "Because love finds a way to shine, even in the darkest closets." Together, they walked to the wall. Mike pressed his note carefully onto the glass, right next to ones that read, "Mom's Sunday pancakes," and "My little sister's first words," and "The way my dog wags his whole body." The custodian's key felt heavy in his pocket, the one he'd carried for years, the one that had become a symbol of hope for so many. He pulled it out, studying its worn brass surface catching the morning light. Mrs. Carter had already prepared for this moment. A small wooden frame waited on a nearby table, lined with dark blue velvet. Mike placed the key inside, his fingers lingering on its familiar shape one last time. "Would you like to say something?" Whitaker asked softly, offering him the microphone. Mike cleared his throat, looking out at the sea of faces he'd come to know, not just as a janitor pushing his mop through their lives, but as someone who held their stories, their fears, their hopes. "This key," he began, his voice steady, "only opens doors from the inside. That's what makes it special. Just like each one of you has the power to open your own doors, to let light in, to let help in." He paused, feeling Leah squeeze his hand. "But sometimes we forget we have that power. Sometimes we need someone to knock, to remind us we're not alone." The choir's humming grew stronger. And Mrs. Carter's rich voice lifted above the rest, carrying the words they'd sung so many times. "Stay one more day, let morning bring the light." Students and teachers moved forward, adding their notes to the wall. The sound of rustling paper and soft conversations filled the gym as people shared their reasons for staying. Sports championships, graduation days, first kisses, favorite songs, baby siblings yet to be born. Mike and Leah worked together to mount the framed key beneath the wall. Above it, they placed a small brass plaque that read, "For all doors that open from the inside." The morning air was crisp and clean as Mike swept the concrete steps of Cedar Ridge High. His broom made soft scratching sounds against the pavement, while dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Beside him, Mrs. Carter worked with her own broom, her movements unhurried and peaceful. Together, they hummed, "Stay one more day," their voices blending in the quiet morning. Mike paused to watch the sunrise beginning to peek over the trees. The familiar weight of his custodian's uniform felt different now. The patch on his chest read Community Care Coordinator beneath his name. He smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that night at the assembly months ago. "You're thinking deep thoughts again," Mrs. Carter said, her eyes twinkling. She leaned on her broom handle, her silver hair catching the early light. "I can always tell when you're doing that." "Just grateful," Mike replied, gesturing to the school building behind them. "Never thought sweeping these steps would feel like." He searched for the right words. "Like a blessing?" Mrs. Carter finished for him. She nodded knowingly. Sometimes the simplest work is the holiest. The sound of footsteps made them both turn. Coming up the sidewalk were Leah and Maya, each carrying a paper bag that smelled wonderfully of fresh baking. The two girls walked close together, shoulders touching, both wearing bright smiles that warmed Mike's heart. "We brought breakfast," Leah called out, holding up her bag. "Maya's mom made her famous blueberry muffins. And they're still warm," Maya added shyly. She looked healthier now, her eyes clearer, her shoulders straighter. The dark circles that had worried Mike so much months ago were gone. Mrs. Carter clapped her hands together. "Well now, isn't this a proper way to start dedication day? Come on, let's set up right here on the steps." They arranged themselves in a small circle, sharing muffins as the sun continued to rise. Mike watched his daughter laugh at something Maya whispered, noting how naturally they leaned toward each other, supporting without words. Both girls wore the light blue Light Keepers wristbands that had become common sights around town. "The wall looks beautiful," Maya said softly, glancing through the school's glass doors where they could see the new installation gleaming in the gymnasium. "Mom cried when she wrote her note last night." Mike nodded, understanding completely. The wall had become more than just a collection of papers. It was a testament to community, to survival, to hope that refused to die. "Your mother's strength helped make this possible?" he said. "Everyone's did." "Remember that first handful of notes?" Leah asked, brushing muffin crumbs from her lap. "Now look at it. We need a whole wall just to hold them all." Mrs. Carter reached over to squeeze Maya's hand. "And every single one matters. Every voice, every story, every reason to stay." They finished their breakfast as the sky brightened fully, painting everything in warm morning light. Other cars began pulling into the parking lot, teachers arriving early, maintenance staff, and even Principal Whitaker, who waved as she hurried inside with an armful of papers. Mike stood, brushing off his uniform. "We should head in. The dedication ceremony starts in an hour." But before they could move, Maya pulled something from her backpack, a small pink sticky note and a pen. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote, but her smile was steady. The others watched quietly, respecting the moment. When she finished, she held up the note. In careful letters, she had written a single word: "Because love." Tears welled in Mrs. Carter's eyes. "Oh, child," she whispered, pulling Maya into a gentle hug. "That says it all, doesn't it?" They walked together through the doors and down the freshly mopped hallway to the gymnasium. The massive wall stretched before them, protected behind clear panels, but still warm and inviting. Hundreds of colorful notes created a patchwork of hope. Some faded from time, others bright and new. Each one a promise to stay another day. Maya stepped forward and carefully placed her pink note near the center, right next to the framed custodian's key that had started it all. The morning sunlight caught the glass, making everything glow. Mike felt Leah's hand slip into his as they stood there, 3 generations united before the wall of survival. Mrs. Carter began humming their hymn again, and soon they all joined in, their voices soft but strong in the morning quiet. The wall before them shimmered with possibility, each note a tiny beacon in the dawn. And there in the center, Maya's simple message spoke the truth they'd all learned. Because love. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Miguel Mike Alvarez, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.